Kai has passed away. My mother-in-law, who had been struggling with alcoholism, had a severe accident while drunk, leaving her in a coma for a year and a half. In the midst of Kai's funeral, she woke up, and I had to tell her the truth. She seemed dazed, probably due to just waking up from such a long sleep, but when she heard my words, her eyes widened in shock and she started to lose her composure, muttering, "No. No." Calmly, I continued, "It's true. His funeral was today." "Why is he dead and you're still healthy?" She glared at me sharply, hysterically screaming at me. I faced her rage without flinching, maintaining a firm demeanor. "Let's go, Mom. I'll take you," I said, smiling quietly at her. As she stood confused, wondering where she was being taken or what I might do to her, I gently stroked the letter in my pocket through my clothes. This letter was entrusted to me by my late husband. If she reads what's inside, she will surely recognize Kai's feelings. He died before he could pass it on, but I have resolved to fulfill this task on his behalf. I steeled myself quietly. My name is Mia. I lived with my husband Kai. We were in our 4th year of marriage, and I must say, we got along very well. We didn't have any kids yet. We both worked hard during the day and at night we would do house chores together, have dinner, then chat pleasantly or watch movies, a hobby we both enjoyed, and then go to bed together. On weekends, we would take walks around town or occasionally go on trips, enjoying our ordinary yet happy life. Despite feeling happy every day, there were some troubling issues with my husband's family. One issue was that Kai was sending a considerable amount of money back to his family every month. His mother had been involved with a man who was one of her clients during her younger years working in nightlife. That man was Kai's father. They never married, and further, Kai's father had his own family. Knowing this, his mother fell in love with him regardless. The man promised to take responsibility, yet one day he suddenly disappeared, leaving Kai's mother pregnant and alone. Thus, Kai grew up never knowing his father. While raising Kai, his inherently reckless mother would leave him alone at night to go out into the city. During one of these nights, she became pregnant again. This time not even knowing who the father was. That child was Kai's younger brother. She raised the 2 boys on her own as a single mother. When his brother was born, Kai was 5 years old. Still at an age where he needed affection, he was forced to endure because he was the older brother. His brother was always prioritized. Kai, although envious, never voiced his feelings and just watched. Also, having been raised by the neglectful mother, Kai learned to take care of himself and the household from a young age. Consequently, his mother relied heavily on him for household chores and childcare, often leaving him to babysit his younger brother while she went out. Furthermore, his mother had always loved drinking, and would often get drunk by herself every night. Taking care of his mother also became one of Kai's responsibilities. Growing up with these experiences, Kai felt it was natural to help his mother and brother, a feeling that continued even after he married and started his own family. He was still sending about $4,000 a month to his mother and brother, who were only working part-time and spending their money on hobbies like following underground music scenes, drinking, and smoking, essentially living day-to-day. In other words, nearly all of their living expenses were covered by Kai's remittances. I was shocked when I first heard about it. It seemed to me a distorted relationship that his younger brother and mother, who are still of working age, depend solely on Kai for their living expenses. "It's a troubled family," Kai would say in a complaining tone, but he seemed resigned to sending money, as if he had no other choice. I was worried about Kai, who had been exploited by his family all his life, and I had talked to him several times during our relationship and after we got married about reconsidering the remittances, but having been used by his mother since childhood, he seemed almost brainwashed into accepting the situation as normal, saying, "If I don't send money, my family will be in trouble." Although we were married, I didn't want to overstep into his family affairs too much, and considering how much he cared about his family, I couldn't speak too strongly about it. Kai had a good income, and I was working too, contributing the same amount to our finances, so even with the money he was sending back home, we had enough to live on. Apart from his family issues, Kai himself was a wonderful person, and I truly loved him, so I planned to continue patiently persuading him about his family at the right moments. Despite my worries about his family, Kai and I were living peacefully day by day. Then one day, an unusual call came from his younger brother on Kai's phone. Usually, it was their mother who contacted us for money or favors, so it was rare to hear from his brother. Kai picked up, and after talking for a while, he exclaimed in surprise. Apparently, his mother had fallen off her bicycle while drunk, hit her head, and was hospitalized unconscious. We rushed to the hospital where she was admitted. Once there, we spoke with her primary doctor. There was no danger to her life, and her head scans showed no abnormalities, but she hadn't regained consciousness due to the severe impact. There was no specific treatment, and we just had to wait for her to wake up. We were given the choice to keep her hospitalized or watch her at home. If we chose hospitalization, the costs, which Kai would have to cover, would be substantial. Continuing the same remittances for his brother at home, plus paying his mother's hospital bills, would indeed be too much. Someone had to take care of her, but his brother, having lived at home all his life and being pampered by his mother, had no intention of caring for her. He left the hospital quickly, as if it was none of his concern. I was furious with his irresponsible brother, but realistically, I couldn't expect him to be able to care for her. After discussing it, Kai and I decided to take her into our home. Kai approached me apologetically about taking his mother in, but I saw no other option and quickly agreed. I wasn't particularly fond of Kai's family, but it was his crisis, so I didn't hesitate to help. However, Kai said he didn't want to burden me, so while we were working during the day, he hired a caregiver and he took care of her at night. After working all day, he came home to care for his mother. It was an incredible burden. As the days went on, I could see the fatigue on Kai. He rarely got a full night's sleep, having to check on the IVs and tend to her other needs, and the exhaustion was accumulating. Kai refused my help, but one day he fell ill from the strain. It was clear that the caregiving was taking its toll on him. Yet he stubbornly tried to do it all by himself. That's when I couldn't hold back any longer.
I can't just watch you wear yourself out. We're family, let me help.
We hardly ever argued, but it might have been the first time I scolded him in such a strong tone. Perhaps shocked by my raised voice. Something I had never done before, Kai just stood there, stunned. Ignoring his reaction, I took over the care of his mother that he had started. That day, he didn't scold me for it. And from that day on, he began to accept my help. It had been almost a year since we started taking care of his mother. It was tough, but Kai and I managed by supporting each other. One night, as we looked at his unconscious mother sleeping, Kai murmured, "Real family is supposed to cooperate like we do now. I've finally realized that. The way my family used to rely on me, that wasn't normal at all." As a child, he believed that if he worked hard to support his mother, he would eventually notice him and return his affection. He devoted himself wholeheartedly to his family with that hope. However, contrary to his hopes, Kai was never truly fulfilled with love from his mother. Instead, the demands from his family only escalated. His family took his care for granted, and Kai himself fell into the trap of equating being relied upon with being needed. Even as an adult, I think I was unconsciously trapped by the desire to be loved that I had as a child, Kai said with a dry laugh. Though he was laughing, his expression seemed forced and lonely. Seeing his lonely profile, I couldn't help but hug him gently. Thinking of all Kai had endured made my throat tighten with pain, but I felt it wasn't right for me to cry then. Holding back my tears, I joked a little. You do have a family that loves you right here, don't you? I tried to lighten the mood, but my voice cracked a bit, trying to hold back tears, making it somewhat awkward. Seeing this, Kai showed me a genuine smile, different from before. That night, Kai and I talked a lot. Since taking in his mother, our nightly conversations had become less frequent. It felt like we were reclaiming that time, talking about his family, our college days, recent work, and various other topics. Just before we went to sleep, I said to him, "There'll be all kinds of challenges until we're old and gray, but let's overcome them all together." His voice trembling, he simply responded, "Yes." He then promised, "From now on, I won't be trapped by the past, I'll cherish the happiness we have." Taking in his unconscious mother and caring for her was an unexpected and difficult situation, but sharing our hardships and being honest with each other had deepened our bond more than ever. No matter what difficulties awaited us, as long as Kai and I were together, we could overcome anything. I truly believed that. Time passed, and it had been a year and a half since his mother had fallen ill. She still hadn't regained consciousness, and I thought things would continue unchanged. But now, Kai wasn't beside me. He had passed away. After Kai's death, I was devastated by grief. However, I couldn't just keep crying. I had to serve as the chief mourner at his funeral. Soon after his passing, it was decided that Kai's relatives would take care of his mother. They thought it best not to burden me further, and she was quickly taken in by relatives after Kai's collapse. With her care no longer my responsibility, I managed to prepare for the funeral amid my grief. On the day of the funeral, everything proceeded smoothly, but suddenly, in the middle of the service, I received a call from the relative who had taken in his mother. I was shocked to hear that she had woken up. Despite her long unconsciousness, the timing was unexpected. Although surprised, I felt a resolve solidify within me. After the funeral, I rushed to her side. She seemed still dazed from just waking up. In a dazed state of consciousness, my mother-in-law asked me, "Why am I here, and how long have I been asleep?" along with other questions about her situation. Finally, she noticed I was in mourning clothes and asked why. When I replied, "Kai has passed away," she opened her eyes wide in shock and became distraught, muttering, "No. No." As I continued calmly, "It's true. Today was the funeral." She glared at me and hysterically shouted, "Why is he dead and you're still healthy?" The relatives in the room, taken aback by her anger, could not intervene and just stood frozen in the corner. To her, I said, "I'll be taking you there soon," which seemed to surprise her as she looked at me wide-eyed. Then I added, "When you wake up, Mom, I was told to take you to the hospital. I will drive you there, and I think the police will want to speak with us," I said to my mother-in-law with a firm demeanor, unflinching from her angry shouts. My mother-in-law exclaimed in shock, "The police?" Indeed, Kai's death was due to poisoning, and the perpetrator was his own brother, my brother-in-law. From the day he promised me, Kai had been slowly preparing to confront his family. Shortly before his death, Kai had decided to stop the remittances to his brother and to place his mother in a care facility, a decision he communicated to his brother. This sudden declaration was a shock to his brother, who, despite being shaken and pleading, could not sway Kai's firm resolution. His brother disliked the sudden change in Kai, who had always acted as told. My brother-in-law had lived comfortably on Kai's money while being cared for by his mother, and planned to continue living freely on Kai's remittances. Panicking at the thought of being abandoned by Kai, he wrongly concluded that I must be the reason for Kai's change of heart and harbored a grudge against me. Consequently, he plotted to poison me. One day, claiming he needed to discuss something about his mother, he invited Kai and me to his home. Before getting to the point, he brewed coffee and discreetly poisoned mine. He smirked, thinking this would awaken Kai to reality once I was poisoned. However, I was avoiding caffeine at the time. which Kai knew. Unbeknownst to my brother-in-law, Kai drank my coffee along with his own. Shocked when Kai suddenly drank my coffee, my brother-in-law's reaction was too late. Kai began to suffer and collapsed, vomiting soon after ingesting it. Startled, I helped Kai up, but upon seeing him suffer, I immediately felt there's something terribly wrong with the way he's in pain. I called for an ambulance, while my brother-in-law, collapsed on the floor, muttered, "No. It's not my fault." Witnessing this, I felt a chill and confronted him. "Did you put something in the coffee?" He seemed too panicked to hear me. By the time the paramedics arrived and took Kai to the hospital, it was too late. He had already passed away. A hospital examination confirmed my suspicions. Kai died from poisoning. The hospital, sensing foul play, notified the police, and both my brother-in-law and I were questioned by the police. It quickly became evident during the police investigation that my brother-in-law was responsible, and he was arrested for attempted murder against me and for killing Kai. Poison was found at the family home, the same type found in Kai's body. Further questioning revealed that the poison was sourced by his mother, and a plan to eliminate me had been in place between my brother-in-law and his mother for some time. She had opposed Kai's marriage to me, fearing that once married, Kai would no longer be under her control. Later, I went with relatives to take my mother-in-law, who was in a wheelchair, to the hospital. She resisted, yelling, "No, stop," but her body was weaker than she thought from lying in bed all this time. Eventually, she was too exhausted to resist. By the time we arrived at the hospital, the police, already informed, were waiting and took her into custody. After her examination, she would face thorough questioning by the police. Days later, I visited my hospitalized mother-in-law. She looked exhausted from the daily tests and interrogations and spitefully said to me, "Kai is dead, what do you want from me now?" Ignoring her words, I handed her a letter. I felt her gaze, as if she wanted to ask, "What is this?" but I said nothing and left the room. The letter, from Kai to his mother, was essentially a declaration of disownment, stating I will no longer give money to the family home and, should I die first, no estate will be left for you. It was intended to be given to her upon waking up in the care facility. Kai had written this letter the day after the day he promised me. Immediately after making his decision, Kai hired a lawyer and created a will that included the contents of the letter. Although it took him a long time to make up his mind, once he did, his actions were swift. Watching him, I laughed, calling him impatient. But thanks to what he did then, we were ultimately able to prevent any estate from going to my mother-in-law. Leaving the hospital, I looked up at the window of my mother-in-law's room from outside. She must have read the letter by now. Surely, she must be shocked by its contents. She might have been relieved thinking that while the regular support payments would stop, she could still inherit from Kai. Now, that expectation has been dashed. When I told her of Kai's death, she seemed shocked, but knowing now about the past and that she had prepared poison for money, I doubt whether her shock was really about Kai's death or about the end of his financial support. Kai, who received no love as a child and was parasitized by his family as an adult, is no longer with us. But the letter documenting his decision was delivered by me in his stead. Looking up at my mother-in-law's hospital room, I called out to Kai in my heart and then turned away to leave the hospital. Later, I heard from the police that my mother-in-law was not ultimately arrested. A significant amount of time had passed, and during the investigation, my mother-in-law gave vague statements. Coupled with her long unconscious state, pursuing it further was deemed impossible. Despite insufficient evidence allowing her to evade the charges, once discharged from the hospital, she found herself without anyone to care for her. Unable to receive Kai's estate and having spent every penny of his previous support, she had no savings and needed to work. However, her long period of immobility meant that she struggled even to live on her own. It seems she repeatedly called relatives, demanding care and money, but the relatives, who never thought highly of her unreasonable behavior, considered her current plight self-inflicted and refused to help. Of course, she also called me, pretending like nothing had happened and sweet-talking me for money, to which I responded, "Do you think I would give you money? I would rather have you return all the money Kai paid you." She quickly hung up and never contacted me again. Ultimately, my mother-in-law was forced to work despite her condition. Used to immediately spending any money she got and now mostly wandering the neighborhood in a drunken state during the day, that's the rumor I've heard. As for my brother-in-law, after the trial concerning my husband's death, he was sentenced to prison. Lacking money, he couldn't hire a private lawyer, and the court-appointed attorney wasn't very enthusiastic, resulting in a severe sentence without significant mitigation. It seems my brother-in-law will now have a tough time in prison for a while. Following a year and a half in a coma, despite the alcohol having left her system, my mother-in-law eventually returned to drinking more than before and died of acute alcohol poisoning. Living alone, her absence went unnoticed at her workplace where she often missed days without notice. It was only after 2 weeks that someone from her workplace realized something was wrong. None of the relatives wanted to claim her body, and when they contacted me, I firmly refused, so she was buried as a Jane Doe. As for me, I am currently nurturing a new life inside me. In fact, I discovered I was pregnant just before Kai passed away. His decision to change was partly triggered by my pregnancy. While I haven't fully gotten over his death, spending nights alone often brings tears as I remember him. However, I intend to lovingly raise our child, believing that Kai is watching over us from above.